Some were kneeling in a foot of water, while others were chest deep in the lower sump portion of the
No
tunnel.
way.
The water kept coming.
And these are like 13, 14-year-old kids, man. Like, no kid should ever go through this. What's going on, guys? Darius Bentha coming back to you with another reaction video. And today, we're reacting to another cave-in incident gone terribly wrong. This one is involving teens, literally teenagers, which is kind of insane that you can go cave exploring that young. Like in your teens, that's kind of crazy. But I guess without further ado, let's just get right into the story because I'm really eager to see what happens. If you guys enjoy, give it a big thumbs up.
Is the fatal breakdown of the Manchester Hole tragedy. An 8th grade overnight trip is the highlight of the year for students at the Tadcaster Grammar School in the United Kingdom. It was a week of camping, hiking, and caving with their classmates and a few teachers at an outdoor education center run by the county. Joseph, Amy, and Charlie were looking forward to the freedom of the lush countryside with no parents. They were 13 and 14 years old, in their last year before high school.
No way, 13 and 14 years old. Did it say in the last year of high school? Hold on, guys.
They were 13 and 14 years old, in their last year before high school.
Oh, before high school.
The Christmas break was right around the corner, and spirits were high with the vigor of youth. The group headed out to Bewerley Park Outdoor Education Center in North Yorkshire. It was just the first day of the long-awaited trip, and the kids were divided into smaller groups to start the first activity. There were nearly 100 students divided into 9 groups. Amy, Charlie, and Joseph were with 8 other classmates and their math teacher as the adult supervisor. Some groups were off to hike and check out the river. Others would be fishing and rock climbing. This group would be going down in the Notterdale cave system for some underground adventure. One of the more interesting parts of this cave system was the Manchester Hole. Walking around on the surface, it just looked like a small hole in the ground, but it led to a huge cave inside.
That's insane.
The camp guide who would be leading their exploration.
Like, realistically, I wouldn't even put no kids down there. Like, honestly, I wouldn't even dare. Going in caves is so unpredictable. Like, you don't know what's gonna happen. I wouldn't even put those kids through that.
The 17-year-old volunteer who had been through all the caves before.
And the
one
guy,
by one,
the guy touring them is a 17-year-old. My God, the baby himself. Oh my God, this is not gonna end very well.
Lowered themselves into the hole following the guide's instructions. There was a small passageway that led to a huge room. The kids were astonished to see this vast chamber under the ground, when it looked like nothing but a hole in the ground from outside. All 13 members of the group were moving around the room and climbing on rocks. The ground was covered in a few inches of water, but they were all wearing their rubber boots, so it was fun to splash through the puddles and trickles of water. The ceiling in this room vaulted up 50 feet and had stalactite formations growing down from the top in an area nearly the size of a football field. It was an interesting first exposure to caving, and the kids had gotten past their initial anxiety from squeezing down into the hole to get here. After passing through the cave, another tunnel led out of this room into the next. They had to climb down rocks through a muddy path that went down lower and lower underground. After several minutes, the tunnel opened up into another larger room, but nothing like the first one. This room had a lower ceiling and was more narrow, but still plenty of room for the 11 students to climb around and explore. There was more water on the ground, but their boots kept them comfortable as they sloshed through the muddy bottom. Their headlamps were an important tool in this dark cave. Some of the lamps were rather dim, but as a group, they were generating enough light to see the scope of what was around them.
And I'm in here.
Joseph, Charlie, and Amy were feeling excited doing something they had never done before. But that feeling would change when they saw the hole in front of them. The tiny tunnel leading out of this room wasn't much more than a hole in the ground.
Oh my God.
It was only a few feet high and quite narrow. In order to make it to the next room, they would have to crawl on their hands and knees down a tunnel for over 40 feet. The path was irregular and moved left and right, then dipped down. Some rock formations jutted out into the pathway,
these kids do that?
But they were able to pass over and around all the obstacles. This tunnel had a muddy stream on the bottom, which got everyone's clothes wet and muddy. They were nervous with the low light and inability to see past the person in front of them, but also exhilarated when they reached the end and were finally able to stand again. The math teacher was behind the last student and encouraged them to follow the guide and move along. When he finally reached the end of the tunnel himself, the mood in the room was tense. The guide was worried because the water level was so high. It was cold and windy outside, but no rain in the forecast. He didn't remember it being this high before.
Then get out of
The
there.
kids were all standing and
If you think something is wrong, don't even think. Just get out of there, okay, kids? Sorry, this is a little higher than I like. Let's just all start moving out. That's exactly what I would have did, honestly.
deep freezing water,
come on.
and now there was water in their boots, and nowhere to move to dry ground. They had descended even lower underground, and this room didn't quite have the excitement of the others. They now realized everyone was just standing in a pool of water that actually seemed to be rising. At first, the movement of the students kept the water moving around
what
while the
the
guide helped
heck?
lower them out of the tunnel entrance. Now that everyone was standing together, it was obvious that the level had gone up, over the knee and higher on some smaller students. The guide was confused and wondering where the water was coming from, but he was certain that they needed to get out of this room before the water got any higher.
You think? Yeah.
He sent the teacher back through with the students to follow. He would bring up the rear this time and make sure everyone was safely back in the larger and higher second chamber. One by one, the students moved back through the passage they had
Give me
just left.
anxiety.
There were parts where it was easy to move, and two students could crawl side by side, but other parts were more narrow or dipped down, requiring them to move one after the other. The teacher and 9 of the students were inside the tunnel when a blast of cold water flooded in. The students in the back were panicked and screaming ahead, telling everyone to go quickly. Some were kneeling in a foot of water, while others were chest deep in the lower sump portion of the
No
tunnel.
way.
The water kept coming.
And these are like 13, 14-year-old kids, man. Like, no kid should ever go through this. Like, oh my god.
And the kids were desperate to get out of this trap. The teacher quickly moved out of the tunnel and helped pull the students to safety in the open second chamber. The speed with which the water rose was shocking. Several students were stopped before the sump area, knowing they would have to hold their breath and swim through the water-filled section of the tunnel. Everyone was crying and screaming in a shared airspace at the top of the tunnel. Charlie told them that they had to swim through, or they would certainly drown. He was certain that he could hold his breath for at least 2 minutes if he needed to, but was sure that this underwater section couldn't be more than a few feet. He encouraged the others, took a deep breath, and dove under to escape the rising water. Back in the last chamber, there were only 3 people left to enter the tunnel. The guide
Like, guys, like, this is a little bit emotional to me because I have a kid, and I can only imagine how these parents are gonna feel when they find out their kids almost like are trapped in a tunnel filling up with water. It's just that's just insane to me, guys. Like, it's heartbreaking. Not gonna lie, it really is heartbreaking. I really hope they all make it out. Like, I really hope so.
did a tearful Amy that they must swim through the tunnel now, or they would certainly drown. The water had come in a quick pulse, rising up to their shoulders and almost filling the tunnel, their only means of escape. Joseph, Amy, and their guide were entering the tunnel with very little air remaining. There was a small pocket near the entrance, past rocks and stalactites. In one of these underwater sections, they ran into bodies of the students ahead. The guide was planning to catch their breath here in the air pocket
Bodies.
before swimming through the flooded sump, but there was no room. Students were bunched up here trying to catch their breath and build courage to dive underwater, holding their breath without knowing what they would find on the other side. It was sheer panic, and they were running out of time. Amy and Joseph had no choice but to turn around and go back to the last pocket of air.
No,
They were now
not.
all the way back in the room where they started.
No,
The water continued to
no.
rise, and their guide told them to take a deep breath and get ready to move. There was no time to wait. The water was nearing the ceiling and showed no signs of stopping. The 3 of them moved to the edge of the air pocket, and with a last gasp of air, they dove under again and moved through the cramped tunnel. This time the other students had cleared, and the guide pushed his face up to get a last breath before going down into the sump. Amy and Joseph were right behind him as he plunged down into the tight sump. There were no other air pockets, just a frantic swim for their lives.
You gotta hold your breath.
Amy
you gotta hold your
furiously
breath.
pulled herself
Sorry,
through
guys,
the
I was
tight
gonna
section
pause
and
it,
reached
but-
around to feel the path. Suddenly a hand roughly grabbed her arm and pulled with such force, she was freed from the sump and dragged through the final stretch of the flooded tunnel by the 17-year-old guide. Joseph was the last to try to catch his breath in the air pocket, but by the time he reached it, there was no air. He may have tried to return to the inner room, but it too was full of water now. The freezing group standing in the second chamber was stunned. The water was still rising and they had no idea how high it could get.
That's
The tunnel
so
was
sad.
completely
So
full
one
of
kid
water,
did not make it?
and Joseph was still inside. The guide wanted to go back to see if he could help pull Joseph from the deadly flood, but the teacher stopped him from an impossible task. They still had 10 students to get out of this cave system to safety.
Fortunately, you're right.
Knowing how little air was left when he passed the pocket, the guide clearly understood that Joseph had no air inside. Joseph was dead. The teacher and guide led the frantic group back to the surface to alert emergency personnel about the lost student. They were stunned to see blue skies and not a drop of rain on the ground. Where did the water come from?
Zero.
In an incredibly horrific coincidence, the gusts of wind that had whipped up that day at the Scar House Reservoir had caused an unbelievable torrent of water. Thousands of gallons of water were blown over the dam at the reservoir down into the river below. In just an hour, the river rose 4 feet, and this water
Like, honestly, guys, what are the odds of that? The one day you decide to go taking students caving, a big gust of wind threw thousands of gallons of water off a cliff into the reservoir down below, raising the water level, in turn making the water flood into the caving system. In turn, having a kid life end. Like, that's truly heartbreaking, not gonna lie, man. That's
directly down through the cave system
truly
below.
heartbreaking.
Normally, this water would trickle through and continue on to the groundwater below. In this case, the quantity of water pushed into the cave overwhelmed its draining capacity. Water had filled the entire system in a flash flood in just a few minutes. Rescue teams were at the cave within 20 minutes of being called, but the scene had drastically changed in that time. The water level had receded to below the knee, and the team was able to make their way into the tunnel leading to the final chamber. There they found the lifeless body of Joseph Lister. What should have been an amazing
so
trip for the class left kids traumatized, and one dead. Negligence charges were brought against the county council that operated the outdoor center for not checking the status at the reservoir before entering the cave. They were eventually found not guilty on those charges, since this accident was not expected and could not have been foreseen.
Guys, that's absolutely insane. Like, honestly, I'm glad all of them made it out, honestly, but like that one student that didn't, like, that's just heartbreaking. That's really heartbreaking. Wow. Like I said, I have a daughter, so I couldn't imagine being those parents getting that phone call. Yeah, your son didn't make it in a caving incident. Drowned. Absolutely insane. Wow. That was, honestly, guys, I think that was the best one we watched yet. Honestly. But still, really heartbreaking. But with that being said, if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up. Let's see if we can get this video to 150 likes. I know you guys can do it. Like I said, you guys are the best ever. So yeah, let's see if we can get to 150 likes. But if you guys want to see more of these caving incidents, drop down in the comment section below, and I'll definitely make it happen for you guys. I actually really enjoy making these a lot. So with that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and peace.